Well, I think what it's important to know about this is a very complex case, and it's been made confusing, but it isn't actually confusing. And I think the way to look at it is in its three bits. The first bit was the kidnapping of Afia. Now, originally, the Pakistanis and the Americans just said she disappeared and said that they didn't have her. There's now been evidence on tape from the Pakistani police official who was in charge of arresting her and the three children and disappearing her. So it's not confusing. She didn't disappear for 5 years. She was disappeared. The second thing is when she reappeared in Afghanistan, in Ghazni, that was extremely peculiar and nobody understood where she'd come from or why she should be there. But I think it's quite clear that the so-called evidence that she had in her handbag that was supposed to prove her to be a terrorist was completely laughable. But the most important thing is that when she was in the police station in Ghazni, where there were some FBI agents and some American soldiers, and she is alleged to have picked up a gun and shot at them. In fact, the forensic evidence that her defense lawyers produced after two very, very exhaustive visits to Afghanistan showed that there was no fingerprint of hers on the gun, there was no DNA of hers, and there was no bullet hole that came from that particular gun. So I think we can see that that was a scene that was set. The third bit was when she was brought back to America. And why was she brought back to America? She's a Pakistani citizen. She should have, if anything, been taken to Pakistan. Anyway, she was brought back to America in a wheelchair with these 2 shots to the stomach. And in her trial, in the course of the trial, the only evidence against her, there was no forensic, so the only evidence against her came from the soldiers who were present. And according to not one, but several lawyers I've spoken to, those soldiers in the courtroom contradicted each other, but also contradicted the initial statements that they'd made about who stood where and who was there and when she did this and where she was exactly. So I think it's a tragic thing for American justice that the jury found her guilty. But in the climate of New York, post 9/11, somebody whose reputation had been completely trashed deliberately by the people who leaked stories that she was a gun runner or a money launderer for Al-Qaeda, that she was married into a big Al-Qaeda family. All these things were lies, but they were put out into the media. And so not surprisingly, in America, people who didn't know any of the details had an image of her, and it was that false image which allowed her to be convicted. As for getting 86 years, outrageous is the only possible word for this sentence.